Really nice to reconnect with you guys. I was actually on the set of Wolfman a few months back in New Zealand. I got to meet you guys. So it's
when we
really
were doing
nice
that barn scene.
Oh yeah, that was intense. I was actually just talking about that. It was so cool, and it was really cool to see it in the film. So it's really nice to reconnect with you guys. I have a few questions for both of you. So congratulations on adapting this very interesting character to Chris's performance. It was just amazing. But I have a question for both of you. Leigh, what was it like directing such a particularly interesting character? And Chris, what was it like being on the receiving end of that directing?
Okay.
I mean, it was great because the character, because we slowed the transformation down, I knew that an actor would really get to lean into this like degradation. I feel like it would seem to me that's a fun thing for an actor to do, is play a decline, a change. And so it was awesome. And when I found Chris, I already knew Chris's work very well and was a fan of his. So it was kind of awesome to wonder what he was going to do. What was his version of this going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. I think it's the first. I think Leigh and I talked a lot about the movie like The Fly, and just in terms of the progression of the the transformation happening and how, let's call it, slow it is, but there's so much detail in that. And then basically, I think Leigh and I would sort of get to play with the levels of that on set. So, I mean, there were times where we would do a take, and then you would sort of know where the character is at, human, animal-wise, and then just for fun and for the edit, Leigh would be like, let's try this one a little bit more, whatever, animalistic, a little bit more something in the eyes that's more human, whatever it is. Just be able to play with all that stuff is really fun.
Yeah. And that actually leads me into my next question very well, because I was very interested as to when you were filming that barn scene and we were on the camera, we were going around in circles, and I was very interested as to how that was going to be shown in the movie. And in the movie, we see it from the perspective of both the Wolfman and the person, his wife. So how is it like directing that, and how was it like performing that, but not really knowing what the end product was going to convey?
You want to go first?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, I mean, what Leigh and Steph, our GP, did so well was like a lot of stuff was in camera and practical. Now, like, I know in the movie, for example, that scene you're talking about, like, it's much darker. You can't see them, and of course I can see where Julia was on the day. But all those, like, every time there was like these like wolf vision moments, it's all very again in camera and happening on set. So for me, it just adds. There's less to leave to the imagination, because it sort of feels theatrical a little bit what's actually happening. And I kind of like shots like that. I kind of like when it's very technical. I like working with that. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, here 2 seconds, you have to wait. When the camera gets here, you have to go here. It's less about acting, and it becomes more of like some sort of, I don't know, a dance in itself. And I think that's fun.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the choreography of it, like, Chris is great with that. We actually worked, before we started shooting, we had worked for months, he had a movement coach, and we were having Zoom calls where he would like be walking around his apartment, kind of showing me different versions of the walk. So we had all this stuff. The great thing about getting to that moment on set is you're seeing the culmination of all these little bits of work you've done, the work with Arian, the makeup. But I've seen Chris do the walk, and I've seen looks of the makeup, but when you see it all put together is the most gratifying moment, everything.
And one thing I really wanted to talk to you about is one particular, like, filmmaking tactic that you use in all of your movies is the tracking shot. You do it in Upgrade a lot. You do it a little bit in The Invisible Man, and I noticed that you do it in this movie as well. So going into that, where did you come up with that, like, idea of doing tracking shots with the characters, and, like, what's your motive as to it being a part of their character?
You mean, when you say tracking, you mean when the camera is stuck to the performer and is moving with them?
Yep.
I don't know, it just became a thing that, like, Stefan Duccio, the cinematographer, and I, when we were doing Upgrade, we fell in love with this idea of doing that, and people seemed to respond to it. So we kind of love developing this language, and we don't want to force it. I think we only did it a couple of times in this movie. There was one moment where Chris was leaning over. Maybe Chris at the time was like, what's happening? Because we're like, got this camera in this housing, but we kind of love it. It's a way of throwing the audience off balance, I think, that's really fun. Like, the whole movie is kind of spinning on an axis.
And this really isn't a question, but I really wanted to admire how you really were very authentic with animal senses and kind of making it its own thing. I was like, there's a bait and switch kind of in the movie where it's right after he got infected and he's walking through the house and there's that sound and it sounds like there's something big lurking around, and then it's not. It's his like super hearing, and he can hear this tarantula. So I thought that was really cool. It was like it was very interesting how you went about doing that. I have a few fun questions for you guys. What's something that you admired about each other during filming?
Always comfortable to answer these questions. No, I mean, I love, I'm such a fan of Chris because he's egoless, I find. At least that's my perception watching his work. So I loved that he didn't take it too seriously. He wasn't like, leave me alone for an hour so I can get it. He just would come on set.
I was like, get me out of here.
Yeah, exactly. He would come on set, but he's just fearless. There's not that sense of, oh, I want to look a certain way, or I want to. It's just like all about the art, and he seems so artist forward, and that was the type of person I knew I needed for this film. And you can see from Chris's work and the roles he chooses, that's who he is. So I was just excited to be working with him. It was a privilege.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, like, I sort of knew from Leigh's movies previously, like, especially visually, there's always, like you were talking about that shot before, there is a lot of technicality, right? And there's going to be some, I think for some actors, something that could be almost restricting, right? Because things are timed, and it's all about, not that it's all about the visuals, but like there's certain shots that are just going to be technical. And the thing is, I like working in those constraints sometimes, but also Leigh sort of allows there's constraint and freedom and a good balance of that. And so he also allowed me to do things and try things, and coming up with whether it's sounds and body movements and whatever. He sort of in a good way, in the right moments, sort of let me do my thing. You know what I mean? And then, but it's collaborative in that way. And so and then be like, that I like that thing you did. Can you try that again? Or maybe can you try the other thing you did here, because that would work. I like that kind of collaboration. So it's the collaborative thing that I appreciate.
For sure. Yeah. And this is just a fun one to ask. So popcorn buckets have been super popular with movies. So I was wondering, if there were to be a popcorn bucket for this movie, what do you think the design would be?
What is it besides the Dune one that I know about?
There's the Nosferatu one, which was like a coffin.
Like the coffin.
It was pretty cool.
Deadpool Wolverine has like the Wolverine's big mouth, which was actually a play on the Dune bucket. But they've actually, since Dune, they've gotten way more popular. More movies are coming out with them.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Maybe a severed limb, that you can reach into.
Oh, yeah.
It kind of calls
That'd
into
be pretty cool.
Reaching into a severed limb. Maybe the truck. We could use the movie truck.
Just a
truck with like a Wolfman out front.
A boring like glove compartment.
Toolbox. Yeah,
right. You have to open it every time.
It's just like it's nothing to do with it. It's like the bear.
It's a very banal thing in the movie. Yeah, right.
It's a vase.
Yeah, right.
It's in the yeah. Oh god, now I'm laughing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I was actually I have 2 more minutes, so I'm going to ask you another question, more in-depth question. Well, I already mentioned the how you change the realities between Wolfman and his, like, what he sees, and actually that's one of the more emotional parts of the film. I was actually like, when I was watching it, I was like, when Blake is talking and he's like, I can't, like, I think he said, like, I can't understand you, but he's like really mumbling, and she's opening up to him about, like, I love you so much. That was like traumatic and like, dreadful, because after that there's nothing that's going off of what she's saying about how much she actually loves him. So where did you come up with that concept of changing the realities from the Wolfman's perspective to the human's perspective?
I think that was one of the first ideas that I had, when I was trying to think of what would I do with this character. The first thing that presented itself was just this idea of internalizing the wolf change and switching between worlds, so he can't understand what she's saying anymore, and it gets to the point where they can't communicate. So I would say that was the very first idea, and it stayed that way through all the different drafts.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I think it allows you to sort of sympathize with like the attacking call it the monster or whatever, but like. I think it gives you perspective.
It was very sad, and especially
we talked a lot about like the disease angle. Chris and I would always bring it back to like either a neurological disorder like Alzheimer's or dementia, and physical disorders, whether it's Parkinson's, like that thing was the North Star for us, was like treating it like a disease. That's how Chris was coming at it. And we both have personal experiences with people going through that. So there was something to draw on that was meaningful, as opposed to like, it was just a monster.
Yeah.
Awesome, for sure. Well, that's all the time I have for your questions. So thank you.
Thank
for letting me
you.
ask you them.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it was
Cheers.
great seeing you.
Thank you.
My hand's dried now.